Now, in a televised address Wednesday evening, French President Emmanuel Macron delivered a stark message to his nation. Macron warned that Russian aggression knows no borders and could extend beyond Ukraine. He also said he would consider extending French nuclear deterrence to other European countries. And that's a statement Russia condemned as, quote, very confrontational. Macron also acknowledged that the French people's worries are legitimate and said Europe must prepare for a potential future without U.S. support.
Russia has become a threat to France and Europe. I want to believe that the U.S. will stand by us, but we have to be ready if this is not the case. Whether or not peace in Ukraine is achieved quickly, Europe must be able to defend itself better and deter any further aggression.
And the Kremlin is reacting strongly to Macron's speech by saying the French leader's comments are an indication that Paris wants to prolong the war in Ukraine. And the Russian spokesman had particularly stern words for Macron's statement that he is considering sharing France's nuclear capabilities within Europe. Have a listen.
Of course, this is a threat against Russia. If Macron considers us a threat, gathers a meeting of the chiefs of general staffs of European countries and Britain, says that nuclear weapons need to be used, and prepares to use nuclear weapons against Russia, this is certainly a threat.
Mark Perlman, France 24's French politics editor, is here with us to help us understand the implications of Macron's address, both here in France and abroad, of course. Can you give us a little more of an indication of the tone of Macron's speech and also the tone of the reactions out of Russia?
Well, a very grave and solemn tone from the president. First of all, a primetime address that was not planned, that was decided yesterday morning, and clearly a very stark words. The age of innocence is finished. We need to be ready. Russia is a threat. Russia is a threat to Ukraine. It's a threat to Europe. It's a threat to France. It is killing opponents abroad. It is not acting nicely. It is rearming much quicker than we do. So essentially, it's time to hit the panic button. And this is what the French president wanted to convey. And he also wanted to convey the opposite message that the one we're hearing from the White House. Essentially saying Russia is an enemy, we should deal with it as such. Clearly, this is a marked contrast with what we've been hearing since Donald Trump arrived at the White House, or even before his arrival at the White House, and which is obviously music to the ear of the Kremlin. And this is why precisely you had this very harsh reaction from Russia, basically saying, you know, the Americans are treating us in a nice way. Why are the French and the rest of Europe treating us as the enemy? Times have changed, and it's time for Macron to realize this. The French president obviously wants to tell the French public that the time is now to spend more on the military, to make sure that this is a new era. He also touched upon the commercial war that is starting with the United States. He's also taking back center stage after a month of struggling after his call for snap elections. There was a disaster politically. He's the commander-in-chief. He's in charge of foreign policy. Clearly, yesterday's address, today's emergency summit in Brussels, and probably other meetings allow him to play this role, this kind of rally around the flag. And he's hoping that this will also become facts on the ground, whether it's in terms of military spending, whether it's in terms of more European cooperation, because he clearly feels that he's been preaching in the desert for years about European strategic autonomy, that he's been cast aside by other Europeans. He said, no, our protection is in Washington. Clearly, he's telling them, well, I was right, and now it's time to act.
And as we've heard his comments about extending France's nuclear deterrence, I mean, this is huge, making headlines across the world. We can assume it's one of the main topics discussed at the summit today as well. Was he wanting to sort of introduce this concept to the French public before the wider discussion at the summit?
Right. Also because there's been some staunch opposition in some quarters here in France saying, you know, nuclear power is something that France built in the 1960s. We have nuclear autonomy, unlike the British, that have to rely more on an American authorization for potential use. And he said, there's no way we should share it with anyone. As the commander-in-chief, he's the one deciding. And Macron wanted to clarify that what he is willing to discuss is maybe putting the nuclear deterrence at the service of other European countries. He mentioned in particular Germany, obviously, but that he would, in the end, be the one deciding upon the use of such nuclear weapons or not. But he's saying, if other European countries feel that they don't have the US military and nuclear protection, well, obviously, they're going to be interested in knowing what France, what the UK could do, because those are the two only countries that do have nuclear weapon capabilities.
Saying France would step into the shoes as nuclear protector of Europe.
At least he said there should be a discussion about this. I'm not close to the discussion. Yes, it's France's nuclear weapon, but it's also about Europe and not only about France.
And Mark, defense is expensive. Did Macron say anything to the French people about needing to make sacrifices to have this happen?
Absolutely. He essentially, this was a call to arms and call to more spending. He explained that since he was first elected, the military budget doubled, that despite all the spending cuts that are being needed right now because of the debt and the deficit France is facing, there were no cuts in the military. And he's saying, well, actually, we'll have to spend more. This will have to be done thanks to some European funding. Also, Europe not counting military spending as part of the deficit procedure, which is a good thing for France because France is under watch from Brussels because of excessive deficits as we speak. But he also he indicated that this should also be something that is funded not only by public spending, but also by private spending. We know there are going to be meetings between bankers, institutions here in France to see how they could channel essentially money that French people have in the bank, that they could put them for use for military budgets, that there could be maybe new vehicles, financial vehicles created to essentially fund the spending against some kind of reward. But this is one of the only options because obviously the coffers are rather empty. And if you want to spend way more on military, there's no magic money. And so they need to find new and creative ways to do this without, as Macron said, raising taxes. So this is going to be very, very difficult, of course.